When people are listening to this episode, what do you think they will take away from this conversation? Why should they listen to this episode?
I think for me, I've been working on security for a really long time, and there's a lot of things that are very different about Web2 and Web3. But fundamentally, for me, there is a significant amount of overlap. When I was working at Mozilla, we were doing a significant amount of open source work. And a lot of that culture, a lot of that community, a lot of that ethos exists within the Web3 ecosystem. So I found it a lot easier to sort of get in with that ethos in mind, and I feel like the Web3 ecosystems definitely harbor that. But for me, like we have worked on some of the largest DeFi hacks ever, so I do think that we have a unique perspective. Those rooms generally aren't very big, so I do think we have a lot to offer for that.
Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of the Ship Safely podcast. It's an honor to have Jonathan Claudius, the co founder and CEO of Asymmetric Research, in this first episode. Thanks a lot for joining us, Jonathan.
Yeah, well,
You want to give a brief intro?
sure. Really happy to be here, first of all. Thanks for having me. Currently, I'm the CEO and co founder of Asymmetric Research. Before that, I was the chief security officer at Jump Crypto, and before that, I ran security teams for Mozilla. We were responsible for things like Firefox and other products that Mozilla made. But been doing this for 20 years or so.
That's awesome. Like it's great that you have this perspective from both the Web 2, from your, pre-Web 3 experience, and you bring like a wealth of Web 3 experience with, I think, like, I don't know, how many incident responses have you been part of over the years?
If you're talking about Web 2, definitely lost track because, like, it was, it's 20 years. Like, you kind of get lost in the fray over that period of time. Um, On Web3, definitely worked some of the largest. In terms of quantity, I can't exactly tell. The 2022 era was pretty hot and heavy. Um, but it's definitely, at least personally, probably worked over 100 of these cases. They're constantly happening. It's just which ones can we engage in meaningfully.
Yeah, that's astonishing. Over 100 incidents that, involved loss of funds. And the cool thing is that one thing I know is that you were able to recover funds in multiple of these cases, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think fundamentally it's pretty rare that people will recover funds. It's definitely feels like on the averages, probably less than 5% actually recover funds. But for the cases that we have worked and the ones that we have contributed that did result in recoveries, very proud of those, very proud of the teams that came together to pull those off. A lot of times it's a community effort too. It's not any one person. It's just sort of like the village that comes together to solve the problem. So um, big shout out to all the other incident responders that we've been in the trench with.
Awesome. Oh, that's great to hear. Like, even, to say around 5% of the cases were recovered is still much better than zero.
Yeah, I
Um,
feel like I feel like when you lose funds, it always feels like it's zero. And I know for a lot of teams, and it's hard because we don't want to get folks hopes up that they're going to recover, but we're going to do everything that we can to help them get there.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So before we dive into more tricky questions, I wanted to ask you, when people are listening to this episode, what do you think they will take away from this conversation? Why should they listen to this episode?
I think for me, I've been working on security for a really long time, and there's a lot of things that are very different about Web2 and Web3. But fundamentally, for me, there is a significant amount of overlap. When I was working at Mozilla, we were doing a significant amount of open source work. And a lot of that culture, a lot of that community, a lot of that ethos exists within the Web3 ecosystem. So I found it a lot easier to sort of get in with that ethos in mind, and I feel like the Web3 ecosystems definitely harbor that. But for me, like we have worked on some of the largest DeFi hacks ever. So I do think that we have a unique perspective. Those rooms generally aren't very big, so I do think we have a lot to offer for that.
Oh, definitely. To me, it's like, everyone who's coming with a wealth of Web2 security background into Web3 is making the space more mature. Because I think one of the biggest problems in Web3 is that you don't need to be a computer science major or a security expert to join this space and start building, which means that, some people are coming into this space with great ideas to build fantastic, but they don't have any kind of maturity when it comes to security, sometimes even computer science. So there definitely needs to be a balance, and someone needs to strike a balance there. And I think your team, yourself, are doing that. You're doing the entire space a big solid with your experience. So you've worked across Web 2 and Web 3. In your opinion, what are the biggest blind spots when people jump between these worlds?
One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking was like a lot of what we do in Web3 today, or at least a lot of what exists. Some of the solutions that are out there to solve certain types of problems, these problems have been seen before. So like, I think what happens is we oftentimes reinvent the wheel, and then we have to relearn why the wheel was built the way that it was before and how it fits into this new ecosystem. Um, so I think that we have an incredible amount of passion and an incredible amount of talent that's entering this space. But security, by its definition, is very, very multidisciplinary. So when you think about how do we have a good security program or how do we have good security outcomes, the best outcomes come when we get the most amount of perspective in the room. So I think you want these folks that were these early pioneers and kind of figured it out on their own way. And then you want some of the legacy folks coming in and saying, hey, there's actually a pretty predictable pattern here where you can nail down this part of the tent. Like, this is a pretty solved problem. Now, there are certain aspects of Web3 where it's not a solved problem. Like, at least in Web2, the opportunity to like have a mistake or have a compromise and be able to live to tell the tale is a lot easier in Web2 these days. And in Web3, we end up with one transaction, one failure that sort of ends the thing, and then you kind of have to pack up and start over. And I think that fundamentally that's that direct connection to finance in Web3 that we just don't have in Web2. So it's not to say that the folks that have been working in Web2 for a very long time have all the answers, because they certainly don't. But that direct connection to finance, that direct connection to the money, that really has increased the stakes a significant amount, and it requires a village to come together to solve these problems.
Yeah, definitely. One thing which I've heard, as an analogy, and I use it very often, it's when you build in Web3, it's similar to building in the aerospace industry because the impact of a failure of a hack is so huge. It's not as big as in the aerospace industry if you're talking about loss of life and so on, but if you compare it to unmanned space missions that basically went up in smoke, that's sort of like a big loss. Maybe not at that magnitude, but similar. And that means that engineers in Web3 need to, get all their ducks in a row before they launch.
Yeah, I think
So,
I think with
yeah,
emerging industries like that, you are going to end up with a couple space shuttle crashes and explosions. Those industries are also incredibly mature, and they also don't innovate that fast. So like it's a double edged sword in some ways. um, but I do like the analogy to these high stakes things like shuttle missions and nuclear power plants. And I've met actually some pretty cool people in the CISO arena that are entering Web3 that are like thinking about the problem in those ways. And I think it has to be. With a system this efficient, we have to treat it like it's a space shuttle mission long term. I think what we also don't want to do is we don't want to prevent innovation from happening quickly. So it is a delicate balance. There's a slider scale there where you don't want things to blow up, but we also don't want things to slow down.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. When you said mature, like the aerospace industry is very mature, I was thinking like, yeah, there definitely things are move way slower in terms of like no one's rushing it because any mistake could cost a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess like in terms of innovation, it's also interesting. Like, uh, they're trying to get these space shuttles further and further, like to Mars now. So yeah, I guess there's there is like a certain level of innovation there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's
Um,
definitely like there's a danger with getting too far from home, right? And or too far from what we're really comfortable with. But that's what a lot of the innovators that we work with in Web3 are doing is that they're on
yep.
the second mountain over trying to figure out what's over there, and like they might get eaten by a bear, but they might find something pretty cool, and I think that's the kind of trade-off that folks are making.
Yeah, definitely. So, one question that I think is on many people's minds is why did you start asymmetric research? Which particular gap did you see and you aim to fill?
Sure. So in the 2022 era, when I was joining Web3, was also building a team at the same time while also managing pretty high stakes projects. Um, so I got to experience a lot of what the Web3 ecosystem was doing and what the offerings were from. I would say like mostly audit organizations or organizations that are very focused on fixed term work. For us at AR, like we looked at that. We also worked with these organizations very closely. So when we were coming to market, we are trying to figure out a way where we could do something fundamentally different. So the way we approached it was we effectively just said we're going to skip the steepest part of the cost curve, which is where a lot of the audit organizations are, and move just slightly inside that and work on dedicated engagements with our clients. And what you see, or one of the challenges of managing a security program is that it needs constant maintenance, especially with the types of threat actors that some of these projects are facing. They really do need like full-time resources in order to answer the call. So what we did is we worked with clients a lot more on this like full-time basis, and it gives us a lot more time and pressure to not only understand the tech, but also really understand the people and get very integrated with projects. So a lot of our engagements look a lot like core contributorships. But we still work with a lot of these other firms because they play a really important role in building a comprehensive security program. What we saw was that the market really only understood the product market fit for this one thing. And it is a very important thing, but it was something that we wanted to offer clients more, and we wanted to be able to take them along the journey and help them build a durable security program. And that's something that I've been doing for the last 20 years. So like that feels very comfortable to me. Admittedly, as I entered the space, also have a lot to learn still on like smart contract specifics. Um, but I feel like building a program is also just like kind of designing a series of layers, and and one of those layers is doing audits.
Yeah, yeah. I I've been in the audit space for I guess close to 7 years now. And I think about 2023 was when I started sketching, a more comprehensive security program. And then when I found out about AR for the first time, I was like, wow, this is like way better than than what I had sketched. And, I'm so happy someone actually is doing it. And that people like projects that are mature enough, they're actually, using it. Because yeah, I guess like the space, like we discussed in the beginning, is still at the stage where some people might say, well, why do we need all of that, right? We just
Yeah,
need an audit. That's the de facto standard, and that's what we're going to do. We're not going to be, overspending.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, we get that question a lot from people, right? I think it's mostly just a question of like, are you in this for the long haul? I think a lot of projects whether it be VC incentives or otherwise to just ship something, they're under the gun. But as you mentioned, like these mature projects aren't under the gun, and they can afford to think more holistically about how to put together a comprehensive program. And frankly, we weren't sure if people were going to bite on this idea, right? We basically went away from where the product market fit was in the security space and said, hey, we're going to stake out our area over here. And what we learned is that like people actually do like that, and there is a category of customer that will consume that service. And we've had a lot of really great relationships with clients. We're almost 2 years now, and it's been quite the journey.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, that's a good segue into the next question, which has to do with, working closely with teams and being responsible for the whole security of a project. I was wondering, can you walk us through a couple of moments, maybe in Web 2 or in Web 3, where you had to make a very difficult trade-off from the point of view of security under pressure, which was like something that needed urgent an urgent decision, and it was sort of like a trade-off.
Sure, I can. I mean, some of the stuff that worked on when I was at Mozilla is still very confidential, but I can give some examples of the types of problems, maybe. So I used to work on this team called Trust and Safety or Trust and Security. It had different names at different times, but basically it was a cross-functional group of security professionals, lawyers, business people, privacy folks. And what we used to work on are kind of like the most tangly issues that the organization would face. And an organization like Mozilla that's very mission driven, we ended up with some really, really interesting ones. And I think the ones that were the most interesting were the ones where you have two things, two subjects, of which the company is very, very, very invested in that somehow inadvertently end up in tension with each other. I can list a couple examples, like one that's relevant for Web3, in particular Bitcoin, would be like carbon footprint versus taking donations in a foundation from in BTC. Those things are definitely in direct tension and stuff that we discussed at Mozilla. Um, we also discussed projects that were public goods that didn't generate any real income, but somehow they fundamentally started being used by bad actors to do nefarious things. So you have this like weird tension of
Mhm.
like wanting to offer a public good, but not having the revenue to really support the security story to pull all that together and ultimately ending up shutting things down in certain ways. And then the last one that I can think of is basically encryption, and that was it was a big one for a lot of folks. Whew, maybe about 10 years ago, that fight was like really really strong, which was basically it was during the period of time when Let's Encrypt was becoming very popular. It was like, why are we going to give encryption to bad guys? And the fundamental thing is that encryption should just be should just exist, and people who are good will use it, and people who are bad are using it. But when you have encryption and people are using it for human rights violations, or they're using it for CSAM material or abuse, you end up with these really, really weird and tangly intersections of things that really put your brain to the test on where you land. So I think those are just like a couple tastes of the things that worked on at Mozilla. I would say one of the more interesting things I've done in Web3 was working on the Wormhole protocol. So we've been core contributors there for a number of years. In the 2022 era, bridges were basically under siege. Bridges were having a heck of a time defending against
Oh.
nation state attackers. And the reason why is because the community demanded no friction. It was a very utopian principle at the time. Allow me to move all the money that I want all at once in one transaction. And I think now we look forward into like 2024, the world's wizened up quite a bit and realized that that's not a good thing. And then you end up losing all the money in one shot. So when we were working on the Wormhole project, a lot of Wormhole security contributors came together and we were discussing this concept of a governor, which was like an in protocol rate limiter that prevented contagion risk from connected chains. So basically, from each origin chain, you could only lose so much in a day, which would allow the project to start doing risk management. And when we were implementing that, people were freaking out that they couldn't move $300 million in a single transaction. And there was a lot of pushback at the time. I mean, you can go on to the Jump blog and see some of the blog posts that I wrote there. Um, but fundamentally, I think that was just a game of like trying to get the community excited about defense in depth. And I think Wormhole definitely took that in and internalized a lot of that in their defenses. They have the governor now, they have another accountant tool, and there's a number of other off-chain monitoring stuff in place. So I think the main concern or the main challenge for that particular era is that people were getting erased by one failure, and that's not how engineering works. That's not how software works. So you need to be able to survive a couple blows before so that you can learn from your mistakes. And doing things like that rate limiter was a pretty contentious thing to introduce to the protocol, but I believe, especially today, it's created a situation where the protocol can really innovate faster and they can operate with a significant amount more confidence.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think like Wormhole is probably the most secure bridge out there. So all the work that you guys put into it definitely paid off. But like, you know, speaking of maybe like close calls or anything that sort of failed, could you remember of something like that that changed the way how you approach things, how you work?
I guess when I was younger, I always felt that success is actually the thing that like allows you to learn and continue and iterate. Um, it sounds silly saying it out loud, but now as an older person who's like kind of worked through this, is that like failure is probably the most amazing thing that you can use to sort of like learn from your mistakes. Obviously, you have to be able to survive to learn for the second round, but it's a very counterintuitive signal. I think a lot of folks believe that if you're in the say you're trying to interview a candidate, for example, and you're trying to suss out the skills and capabilities of an individual, you want to see that that individual had lots of success. But what's really interesting, I think, for us and how we've like looked at talent, really looking for people who've gone through immense amount of failure, because I think you learn a lot more from failure than success. I think that some of the best engineers out there, the ones that are like, they got scars all over their face, like they're that like that battle hardened soldier. Those are the folks that you want on your team. The folks that have tried a bunch of stuff and they know how not to make the thing work, because what those people are going to do, and it's you're never going to see it in a Jira tracker. It's never going to show up as a strict line item in a meeting or something like that. But what they're going to do is they're going to reduce the graph of possibilities and they're going to increase your chance of success. So that's a big thing that I think I've taken away with like trying to build a diverse team here at AR. And we continue to learn from our staffing and our like hiring decisions, but I think seeking out people that have been through an immense amount of failure and have learned from it is kind of like a big thing to sort of orient towards.
Definitely. That's great advice as well, I think. We're gonna switch to a different set of questions, which we called rapid fire, the
Hmm.
rapid fire closeout. So for these questions, it would be great if you can answer them in just one sentence,
Okay, yeah.
sort of like the core of the answer. So the first one there is, if you can think about one tool or a piece of tech you'd never want to live without.
For me, I would not want to live without a fundamental programming language that I understand. So Python or Ruby or something in that lane or Go. I tend to build a lot of my own tools when I get into the clinch. So if you force me to use one thing, I'm going to at least give myself the building blocks so that I can make all the other tools that I need.
That's a good answer. The second question is, what's one myth about security that drives you crazy?
Mm, I think it's change. I think if you can accept that change is a constant by being part of the security industry, that you won't one you'll never be bored, but I think it also means that like you're constantly you're accepting that like the next week or the next couple months are uncertain and you're just going to figure it out as you go. um I think that change is one of those things that people think, oh, like in a week or two things are going to get better and it's going to be a plateau and we're coasting from here. I'm going to spend the next 20 years doing this. Like that's not going to happen. The landscape's going to change and it's consistently changed over the last 20 years, and I don't see that slowing down in any way.
So the myth is that, I guess I don't know if that's the myth, but the CISO never sleeps, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially in the security industry, want to become CISOs, but if they actually realized how much risk they were accepting and what they were really signing up for, they'd really take a second thought about wanting to spend a little bit more time in an IC role and really getting some fun in. I think some of the most exciting and fun parts of my career were the earlier parts where I was working on a smaller problem but could get deeper. And then as over time, you find that you're working on broader problems, more strategic problems that some folks wouldn't say are as fun, but for me, it's like you get to have a much wider impact, and that's the thing that kind of tickles me.
Definitely. Final rapid fire question is, name one question you'd like the next guest to answer on the pod.
Mm. So there's a really cool YouTube video, and I hope there's an opportunity to put this in the notes. But there's a really cool YouTube video in a LinkedIn series called "What is Your Job?" And I talked to a lot of engineers that we mentor. I asked this question of them. I asked them to watch this 15-minute video. And a lot of times, what happens is that when you ask someone what their job is, they tell you that they're a security engineer. And the guy in this series talks a lot about soccer. He's an Argentinian, so he loves soccer, or football. But
Yeah.
the idea is that like if I'm a defender, my goal is to stop goals, and if I'm on offense, my goal is to score goals. But fundamentally, like you don't actually win in a soccer game unless you score more goals than the other team and you stop less of those goals on the defender. So for me, watching that video, which I watch pretty much every quarter or like at least once a year since I found out this video, it's really good and centering for me because it helps me really think about what matters. And at least in the soccer analogy, the whole objective is to help the team win. And I think that's where we meet with our clients, right? We meet with our clients. We don't know if we're on offense or defense that day. We don't really know what problems the client's going to face, but we're just there to help them win. And I feel like if more people took that in and took that into their jobs, I think that they would have a significant amount more success by not putting arbitrary walls like, well, I'm just a security engineer. I'm not going to go take the trash out. And it's like, well, if taking the trash out is what makes this client win, that's what I'm going to do. So I feel like for a lot of people, if they were to bring that in, I would ask your next presenter what's their job, but maybe give them an opportunity to watch that video first.
We'll send it to them in advance and then ask them the question on the spot.
Yeah,
Well,
good, good
thanks a lot,
trade-off.
Jonathan. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And do you have any last words for the audience? Where can people find you?
Sure.
Where should people, look up what you guys are doing?
Yeah, you can find us online. We're at Asymmetric Research on Twitter. We're also asymmetric.re on our website, so you're welcome to go check that out. I would say thanks, Seb, for having me today. I really appreciate this discussion. It's good to see you again. And I guess if anyone wants to chat about security stuff, I'm really open. All my channels are open, so feel free to reach out.
Yeah, definitely reach out to Jonathan. He's big on Twitter and LinkedIn, right, Jonathan?
Oh, I don't know if I'm big on this. I actually try to keep a semi-low profile, but yeah, no, I'm definitely out there, and you can find me pretty easily.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for being on the pod, and hope to have you here soon again
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
future.
be good to do an update in 6 months or something like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.